Let me tell you about the afternoon a man met the wrong woman off a train and thanked God for the mistake every day he had left in him. I have told this one at more than one fire, and folks always stop me in the same place to ask whether I stretched it. I did not. Truth, as a wiser hand than me once wrote, is stranger than fiction, and it is a good deal warmer besides. So settle in close. There are two secrets buried in this story. The first one half the town of Cutbank could see coming down the track like smoke on the horizon. The second one not even the two people it belonged to knew they were carrying, folded up small and quiet inside them for 5 long years. Stay for both. I give you my word, the second is worth the wait. Dawson Ryder stood on the platform at Cutbank Station in the spring of 1883 with a bunch of wild roses going soft in his fist. He had cut them himself that morning along the creek that fed the Rafter H, and he had carried them the whole 11 miles into town with the care of a man carrying eggs, and now the sun had wilted them a little, and his hands had bruised them a little more, and he did not know how to hold flowers, having never in his 40 years had a reason to. He had courted a woman by letter through the whole of a long winter, a delicate town-bred girl named Cordelia Ackley, whose penmanship was as fine as lace, and whose words had made him believe, for the first time since he buried his partner, that a lonesome ranch might yet hold a family in it. The train came in loud and let off its steam, and Dawson took his hat off and held it against his chest, roses and all, and watched the doors for the small pale girl in the photograph. The woman who stepped down was not small, and she was not pale. She came off the iron steps at a working stride, a carpet bag swinging in one hand, and a coiled rope she had refused to pack away riding her shoulder, and men's work boots showed beneath the hem of her plain travelling dress. She swept the platform with one quick, level look, and found Dawson Ryder before he found her, because she had been told to watch for the tallest fool holding flowers. "You'll be Ryder," she said. It was not a question. "I am." He looked past her at the doors, still waiting. "I'm expecting my sister." The woman set the carpet bag down at her feet like she meant to stay a while. "I'm Letty Ackley. Cordelia's the pretty one. She sends this instead of herself." And she drew a folded letter from inside her coat and held it out to him, and there was no cruelty in the way she did it, only the flat honesty of a person who had ridden a long way to hand a stranger bad news, and meant to hand it to him straight. Dawson read it right there on the platform. I have seen that letter, years after, and I will tell you it was a kind letter as far as such letters go. Cordelia had come as far as the territory line, had looked out the train window at the wind and the emptiness, and the hard brown miles of it, and her nerve had failed her the way a green horse balks at water. She could not do it. She was sorry. She wished him every happiness. She hoped he would forgive a foolish girl who had learned in time that she was not made for the life she had promised herself to. And Letty, watching his face, said the thing that mattered more. "There's worse in it than a jilting. My sister showed your letters around before she lost her nerve, and word of them carried to a man who's been waiting on just such news, waiting for your marriage to fall through. He knows that deed you and your partner signed better than you do." She nodded at the letter in his hand, as though the trouble were written there instead. "The condition in it. You know the one." Dawson knew it. His late partner, old Amos Blaine, had built the Rafter H with him hand over hand, and when Amos was dying he had asked one thing and written it into the partnership deed, that the surviving partner not spend his years alone, but take a lawful wife by a fixed date. Dawson had signed it without weighing, the way you sign anything a dying friend asks of you, and he had never once read it since. The deed as it stood said that failing that marriage, Amos's half of the co-held ranch fell into his blood heir. Amos had meant the whole of it as an old man's blessing, a shove toward the family Dawson had never made time for. But Amos's son Roderick was a different animal from his father, a cattle baron with soft hands and a hard eye, and to Roderick Blaine that deed was not a blessing. It was a key to a door he meant to walk through. "The date's today," Dawson said quietly. "The date's today," Letty agreed. "I read it on the train." Cordelia never did understand what she was holding. She looked at him a long moment, taking his measure the way she would take the measure of a horse she had to trust her weight to. "I came to bring you the letter. I didn't come for this. But I'm here, and you're out of road, and I've buried a mother and driven cattle beside my father since I was 10 years old, and I'm not the fainting kind. If a wife by sundown is what stands between you and losing your home, then I expect a wife by sundown is a thing I can be. I want you to sit with what that woman did. She did not know him. She owed him nothing. She had come 100 miles to do her sister's dirty errand, and could have turned around on the same train and gone home to no blame at all. And instead she looked at a stranger's trouble and put her own shoulder under it, because that is what she had been raised to do with trouble. Stay with me. It matters later, more than you can guess. There was a circuit preacher in town that day, as it happened, come through for a burying, and he was persuaded without much trouble to earn a second fee. They were married in the last of the afternoon light on the platform boards where she had stepped down, with the station master and his wife for witnesses, and the wilted roses still in Dawson's hand. And when the preacher said the words that made it real, Letty Ackley squared her shoulders like a woman bracing for a blow and turned to the man she had just bound herself to. "There," she said, "it's done, and I'll not pretend to you it's anything it isn't. You wanted the soft one, Ryder. You wanted the girl with the fine hand who'd keep a pretty house and never once frighten you. You married the wrong sister, and you'd best know it now before you know it later." And Dawson Ryder looked at this tall, blunt, sun-browned woman who had just saved his ranch out of nothing but plain decency, and he laughed. Not a mean laugh, not a laugh at her, a laugh with all the tiredness of a long winter going out of it, the first easy sound he had made in a year. Then he walked her to the little depot cafe across the boards, and he pulled out her chair for her, the same as he would have for any lady, and he waited, hat in hand, until she sat. "Miss Ackley," he said, sitting down across from her. "Mrs. Ryder now, I suppose. I've wanted a great many things in my life and been fool enough to think I knew which ones I wanted, but I have never in my life wanted a woman who'd faint at the sight of the country I live in. I asked for a wife because the deed said I had to have one, and I was lonesome besides, and I let a photograph talk me into thinking lonesome and a pretty house were the same cure." He turned his coffee cup around in his hands. "You drove cattle since you were 10. Tell me true. Can you read a ledger?" "Better than most bankers," Letty said, wary. "Can you rope?" "You saw the rope. Can you doctor a downed cow?" "I can doctor a downed anything." Dawson nodded slowly, and something in his weathered face settled. "Then I'll tell you what I think, and you can tell me I'm wrong. I think my sister-in-law that never was did me the largest favour of my life and hasn't the first idea of it." "Wrong sister." He shook his head. "I don't believe there's such a thing." Over the supper that followed, he laid the whole of it out plain, the partnership and the deed and the deadline they had just beaten by an hour, and Roderick Blaine sitting out on his big chalk bluff, spread like a spider that had felt its web go slack. Amos Blaine's half of the Rafter H would have fallen to Roderick clean and simple if Dawson had missed the date. Now it would not, and Roderick was not a man who lost gracefully. "He'll come," Dawson said. "He'll come, and he'll look at you, and he'll go away and think of something. I won't lie to you about the trouble I've married you into, Letty. It's the one honest wedding gift I've got." "I've never yet run from trouble I could see coming," said Letty Ackley. "It's the kind you can't that gets you." The Rafter H took her in the way hard country takes anyone, which is to say it did not take her at all and made her earn it. The hands were 4 in number and old in the trade, and they had seen ranchers' fancy notions come and go, and a wife off the train in men's boots struck them as one more notion. They watched her for a week the way you watch weather. Then, on a grey morning, a heifer went down in the birthing bog by the lower fence, half carved and failing, and 2 of the hands stood in the muck arguing over whether she was worth the trouble of saving. Letty came off her horse without a word, stripped her sleeves to the shoulder, and went into that cold mud on her knees. She read the trouble with her hands the way she'd said she could read a ledger, turned the calf that was turned wrong, roped its slick forelegs with a hitch none of them had seen, and brought a live bawling calf out of a dying cow, and then brought the cow back too, and stood up black to the elbows and streaked to the chin, and looked at the 4 old men looking at her. "Well," said the oldest of them, a leather strip of a man named Cobb who had not approved of anything since 1871. "Well, now." And that was the whole of the speech, but every man there knew it for the surrender it was. She gentled a rank sorrel gelding that week that had thrown 3 of them, not by breaking him, but by out-patiencing him, standing in the round pen through a whole long evening until the horse decided on its own that she was not a thing to fear. She got down into the ranch ledgers that Dawson had let tangle since Amos died, and she found $19 the feed store had double charged, and a mistake in the tax rolls that had been costing them since the year before, and she sat at the kitchen table by lamplight with her tongue between her teeth and put the whole crooked account straight. She mended fence in the cold. She learned every gate and drawer and spring on the place. And of an evening, when the work let go of them both, she and Dawson took to sitting out on the porch in the last light, not saying a great deal, watching the same stars come out over the same ridgeline, and somewhere in there, without either of them marking the day it happened, the sitting together stopped being two strangers resting and started being something else. Roderick Blaine rode out on a fine black horse in a fine town coat about 3 weeks in, and he sat that horse in the yard without getting down, which is a thing a certain kind of man does to tell you what he thinks of your ground. He looked Letty up and down where she stood in her work clothes with a coil of wet rope over her shoulder, and he smiled the way a knife smiles. "So, this is the article," he said. "I had heard my late father's partner beat the clock with a bride, and I confess I pictured something more in the bridal line. You're a mannish sort of substitute, aren't you? A stand-in, a dodge on paper to steal what my father meant for his own blood." He gathered his reins. "It won't hold, you know. A thing that's done to beat a deadline is done in bad faith, and bad faith unravels." Letty did not step back, and she did not raise her voice. "You're right that I'm no bride in the town line, Mr. Blaine, and you can call me mannish till your jaw tires. It's no news to me. But you rode all the way out here in your good coat to say it, and a man doesn't ride 11 miles to insult a thing he isn't afraid of. You go on home and dream up your paper. I've untangled worse than you out of that ledger this month, and I found every crooked figure in it." She smiled then, and it was not a knife smile. It was worse for him. It was an amused one. "Careful what deeds you go leaning on. Old paper has a way of not saying what a man wishes it said." He rode off without another word, and I will tell you his jaw was tight the whole 11 miles. The letter from her father came the next week, and it was the hardest thing the story had thrown at her yet, because it was kind. Ezra Ackley wrote in the plain hand of a man more used to a branding iron than a pen. Cordelia had recovered her nerve and her health, he wrote, and there was a schoolteacher back home, a decent, steady young man named Peter Vance, who had asked after Letty particular, and would have her to wife glad and grateful if she chose to come home. Her father did not tell her what to do. That was not his way. He only laid the road out flat so she could see where it went. She was free, he wrote. Nobody would hold it against her if she came back to a soft life and a good man, and the country she knew. She had done her sister's duty and more. She could come home. Letty sat with that letter a long time at the kitchen table, and out the window. Dawson was in the near pasture doing her share of the fence along with his own, so she'd have an easy evening, not knowing what she was reading, and Letty Ackley, who had never once had trouble knowing her own mind about a horse or a herd or a crooked figure in a book, sat there and found she did not know her own heart half so well as she knew all of that. And then she thought about how a man had pulled out her chair on the day she told him he'd married the wrong sister, and she took up the pen and wrote her father back short and sure. She was not coming home. She had found a fight worth staying for, and a home worth fighting for, and she would thank Peter Vance kindly, and would he please give the good schoolteacher no false hope. She was a rider now. She meant to go on being one. Roderick Blaine's paper came the way Dawson had promised it would. It came as a petition filed before Judge Ephraim Kittredge of the Territorial Circuit, a document full of long, smooth lawyers' words that all pointed at one short, ugly thing. The marriage of Dawson Ryder to Letty Ackley, it said, was no marriage at all in the eyes of a fair court, but a fraud got up in an afternoon of desperation. The wrong sister stood in at the last hour for the sole and cynical purpose of defeating the deed's plain condition, with no genuine intent of man and wife between them. Void the sham, the petition asked, and let the condition fall as it was meant to fall, and let Amos Blaine's half of the Rafter H come home to Amos Blaine's son. Dawson read it aloud to her at the kitchen table where she had read her father's letter, and when he finished his hands were not quite steady. "He's clever," Dawson said. "That's the devil of it. Every fact in there is true. You are the wrong sister. It was the last hour. The deadline was the reason we stood up. He's built a true wall out of true bricks, and the only thing false about it is the whole of it." "Then we don't argue the bricks," Letty said. She had gone very still and very calm, the way she went before she stepped into cold mud after a dying cow. "We argue the wall. He says there was no genuine intent. Let him." And meanwhile, she pulled the deed and the tangled ledgers toward her across the table. A man who'd forge a marriage out of true facts is a man who'd forge other things, and I have had my hands in Amos Blaine's paper for a month now, and something in the reversion clause has been sitting wrong with me, and I could not say why. Give me the lamp, and give me time. Now here is where the second secret starts to surface, and I told you it was the one worth waiting for. So lean in." It was late, days later, and Letty could not make the ledger give up its last answer, and to rest her mind she did the thing her hands did when the rest of her needed quieting. She took up a length of rawhide and a horse's hackamore that needed mending, and she braided. Her mother had taught her the braid when she was small, an old and particular pattern, a double diamond hitch that ran down the cheekpiece like a row of linked stones, and there was not another hand in the territory that made it, because it was her mother's and now it was hers. She sat by the lamp and braided the double diamond into the new hackamore without thinking, the way you hum an old tune. Dawson came in from the barn and saw it in her hands, and he stopped in the doorway as though he had walked into a wall. He crossed the room slow. He picked the hackamore up out of her lap without asking, and he turned it toward the lamp, and he ran his thumb down the row of linked diamonds, and when he spoke his voice had gone strange and careful. "Where did you learn to make this braid?" "My mother," Letty said, watching him. "It's hers. Nobody makes it but us." "Why?" Dawson did not answer with words. He went to the trunk at the foot of the bed, the one Letty had never opened because it was his, and a person's trunk is their own, and he took out of it a thing wrapped in an old shirt, and he unwrapped it and set it on the table under the lamp beside her fresh braiding. It was a length of rawhide gone dark and stiff with 5 years of age, shaped and dried around a splint, a rough brace such as you would tie fast to a broken arm to carry a man out of hard country, and down the side of it, unmistakable, worn but plain, ran a row of linked diamonds. The double diamond hitch, her mother's braid, her own hand. "The Powder River," Dawson said, and he had to stop and start again. 5 years back, the spring flood of 78, I was young and I was stupid, and I put my horse across the Powder when she was up and running brown, and she went out from under me and I went down. I don't remember most of it. I remember the cold, and I remember I'd quit Letty. I'd gone under and quit. And then there was a rope. A rope came out of nowhere onto me and hauled me up the bank, and there was a girl on the other end of it, a half-grown girl on a mud-caked horse who'd seen me go in from a quarter-mile off and come running. She never told me her name. My arm was broke and I was out of my head with the cold, and she splintered it with a piece of rawhide off her own saddle, and she braided it fast so it'd hold, and she got me to a line shack and got a fire in me, and she'd read the brand off my soaked saddle in the dark, so she knew whose outfit to fetch, and she rode off at first light to bring my own men back for me, and she was gone before they came. I never knew her name. I have kept this brace 5 years because it was the thing that carried my arm, and because some girl I never thanked braided it, and I could not throw it out. He looked up from the dark old rawhide to the fresh bright one in her lap, and his eyes were wet. "It was you. It was your braid. It was your hand and your rope. Letty, it was you the whole time." She did not remember his face, because a drowning stranger's face in floodwater at 15 is not a thing you keep. But she remembered the flood, and she remembered the man she pulled out of it, and she remembered the braid she tied because it was the only knot she trusted to hold on a broken bone. And the two of them sat in the lamplight a long while, and did not say much, because there was not much that could be said. She had saved his life 5 years before either of them ever heard the other's name, and neither had known it, and here they were, married on a platform by a chance and a deadline and a runaway sister, and it had not been chance at all. It had never once been chance. The hearing was held in the Cutbank courthouse on a hard, bright morning, with half the county packed in to see it. Roderick Blaine's lawyer was a smooth city man who laid the case out just as the petition had, cool and clean and cruel, and every fact of it true. A courtship by letter to one sister. That sister's flight at the territory line. A second sister substituted in a single desperate afternoon. A marriage stood up on a train platform within the hour of a deadline that would have cost the man his land. "Your Honour," the lawyer said, "I do not accuse these people of wickedness. I accuse them of a technicality. There was no genuine marriage here. There was a signature got to beat a clock. The law asks for a true union, and what it received was a stratagem. I ask the court to see the difference." Judge Ephraim Kittredge was a plain old man with no patience for lace, and he heard it all with his chin in his hand, and it did not look good, and the courtroom knew it did not look good. Then Dawson Ryder stood up, and he asked leave to tell the court a thing that was not in any paper, and the judge, who liked a thing that was not in any paper, allowed it. And Dawson told them about the Powder River in the spring of 1878. He told it plain, the crossing and the drowning and the quitting and the rope, the half-grown girl who came out of nowhere and hauled a stranger up a bank and splintered his broken arm and rode off before dawn without leaving her name. And then he set the old, dark 5-year-old brace up on the rail where the judge could see it, and beside it he set the new braided hackamore Letty had made not a week before, and he asked the judge to look at the 2 braids and tell him whether the same hand had made them both. They ask, was there genuine intent, Dawson said, and his voice carried to the back of the room. They ask, was it real? Your Honour, this woman saved my life 5 years before I knew her name, with her own rope and her own hand, and asked nothing and took nothing and rode away. And then a runaway bride and a dying man's deed put her back in front of me, and I did not know her, and she did not know me, and we married strangers. If that is a stratagem, then God gets up stranger stratagems than any lawyer I ever met. I did not marry the wrong sister. I married the woman who pulled me out of the river. It only took us 5 years to find it out. The room was dead quiet, and into that quiet Letty Ryder stood up, and she did the thing the heroine of this story was always going to do, which was not to weep and not to wait to be saved, but to lay her proof on the table. She had found it at last, 3 nights before, by lamplight, at the bottom of Amos Blaine's ledgers. She laid the deed open on the rail, and beside it the account books, and in her plain, sure voice she showed the court the reversion clause, and she showed them the ink, and she showed them the hand. The clause that gave Roderick his opening was a forgery. Amos Blaine had written that deed with his own hand, sure enough, the marriage he asked of Dawson and the very date he set for it, all of it his true and dying wish that the Rafter H not be left to a lonesome man. But the reversion clause, the single line that said where Amos's half should go if that marriage failed, had been altered after the old man was in his grave. Amos's own hand had sent it to be sold for the county poor. A different hand, in fresher ink, had struck that out and written in its place that it fell to Amos's blood heir, and the figures that new clause leaned on named a filing number the ledgers proved had not so much as existed until 8 months after Amos was buried, so that no dying man could ever have set them down. Roderick had been executor of his father's estate. He had kept the strong box and the deed inside it the better part of a year, alone, with a steady pen and every reason to use it. He had not found a technicality in his father's deed. He had made one with a pen over his father's grave, and the ledgers his wife had spent a month setting straight with a calendar that hanged him. Your Honour asked whether it was real, Letty said, and she turned from the deed to the judge and stood square before him. The deed's the forgery, not my marriage, and since you've asked it twice today whether there's genuine feeling in this union, I'll answer it plain, because I'm not built to answer any other way. I did not love this man when I married him. I married him because it was decent, and he was out of road. But I love him now. I love him for pulling out my chair the day I told him he'd married the wrong sister, and I've loved him a little longer than that without knowing it, I expect, since about the time I hauled him out of the Powder River. You want to know if it's real? It's the realest thing I've got. Rule how you like. It won't change what's true. Judge Ephraim Kittredge looked a long while at the 2 braids on his rail, the old and the new, made by the one hand 5 years apart. Then he ruled. The petition was dismissed with prejudice and costs. The marriage stood, genuine and lawful, and, in the judge's own dry words, more genuine than most he'd blessed himself. And the forged deed he did not let lie. He put the fraud of it into the record and sent it on to the territorial marshal, and Roderick Blaine, who had come to court to steal a ranch with a pen, walked out of it a man facing charges for the pen he'd stolen with, his big chalk bluff spread already mortgaged to the neck, and his name already turning to poison in the county. He left the country before the summer was out, and did not come back, and there is a justice in a grasping man losing everything reaching for what was never his that I never get tired of watching land. They were married again 3 weeks later, properly this time, in the churchyard at Cutbank, with the whole outfit there, and old Cobb scrubbed pink and uncomfortable in a collar, and this time there were no wilted roses and no deadline and no bracing for a blow. This time Letty walked to Dawson Ryder because she chose to, and said the words because she meant them, and when it was done the hands threw their hats so high one of them never did come down off the church roof, and the old dark brace, the 5-year-old rawhide with the double diamond braid that had carried a drowning stranger's broken arm out of the Powder River, Dawson hung it on a peg in the front hall of the Rafter H, where a body would see it coming in the door, and there it stayed, all their long years, so that neither of them would ever forget that the truest thing in their lives had been braided by her own hands, half a decade before they had the sense to find it. So that is the story of the wrong sister, who was the only right woman in the territory. And I hope you'll forgive me if I told the second secret slower than the first. Some things earn a slow telling. If your own heart went a little warm somewhere back at that river, then you and I are cut from the same cloth, and there is a whole fire's worth of stories like this one waiting for you. Tales of hard country and harder women, and the plain good men with the sense to love them right. Pull your chair a little closer. Stay a while. The fire's not going anywhere, and neither am I.